understanding about Jesus that on his way during Lent to Jerusalem, that he took his disciples aside and he moved them by themselves. And this is where he told them not once, not twice, but 3 times, which is the magic number, that all the bad things are going to take place in Jerusalem. At least we perceive them to be bad. And his earthly ministry will come to an end. And he told them in these uncertain words that he's going to be handed over to the chief priests and to the scribes. They will be condemned, him to death, and then he'll hand him over to the Gentiles. They'll be mocked, they'll be flogged, they'll be crucified. On the 3rd day, he will be raised. The disciples really believed they could handle that, but Jesus knew that they couldn't. They weren't there yet. Not because they weren't capable, it's just that they weren't there spiritually yet. They weren't mature enough in their relationship with God to drink from the same cup as Jesus. So one thing we learn about being a disciple or a follower of Jesus is that it is a work in progress. You just don't all of a sudden say, I want to be a Christian, and all of a sudden you can walk through fire. It doesn't work that way. It really does require that we move from proclaiming to be a Christian to living his life and even willing to die his death. And so the ultimate goal of Jesus' disciple is to drink from the same cup as Jesus. And that's a difficult road, isn't it? So on this road to Jerusalem, we're going to talk about the contents of that cup that followers of Jesus we really find difficult to drink from and to swallow. Last week we talked about one of the ingredients was the cup, from that cup was submission. Submission is really giving our God control over the foundation of our lives that really determines our choices in life and determines our actions towards others. Submission is really trusting that God will produce in us a quality life more than a quantity of life. Will produce in us a joyful life more than just a life of happiness. That will produce in us a deeper, deeper love. The second ingredient in this cup that we're talking about today is self-denial. That's always a fun one too. I think it's best defined by the way Paul spoke to the people in Rome when he said, I say to you, to everyone among you, not to think of yourself more highly than you ought to think. I like that. Don't think of yourself more highly than you ought to think. So before his ministry began, Jesus was confronted with the same temptations that we are confronted with every single day of our life. We're confronted with, who do I live for? What really does matter to me? How will the end justify the means? How will I conduct my life? Will I be relevant in this world as defined by our society, by living my life my way, as Frank Sinatra would say? Or do I strive to be relevant using God's methods, to try to suppress my ego and be willing to be a servant in order to be an example of God's love in the world? Suppressing our ego makes us useful to God. It is a discipline of removing ourselves from the center of the universe and everything that belongs to me, right? But it also allows God to create in us a clean heart and put in us a new and a right spirit. Listen to these words from Luke as Jesus had to make these decisions through these temptations. But I think it'd be more appropriate if we understand these temptations as being our temptations. So hear the story before Jesus begins his ministry. Jesus, full of the Holy Spirit, returned from the Jordan and was led by the Spirit into the wilderness. And there for 40 days he was tempted by the devil. He ate nothing at all during those days. And when it was over, he was famished. And the devil said to him, if you are the Son of God, command that these stones to become a loaf of bread. Jesus answered, it is written, one does not live by bread alone. And the devil led him up, and he showed him in an instant all the kingdoms of the world. And the devil said to him, if to you I will give their glory and all this authority, for it has been given over to me, and I give it to anyone I please. If you then will worship me, it will all be yours. And Jesus answered, it is written, worship the Lord your God and serve him only. Then the devil took him to Jerusalem, placed him on the pinnacle of the temple, and he said to him, if you are the Son of God, then throw yourself down from here, for it is written, he will command his angels concerning you to protect you, and on their hands they will bear you up, that you will not dash your foot against the stone. And then Jesus answered him, it is said, do not put the Lord your God to the test. And so when the devil had finished every test, he departed from him until an opportune time. I don't know about you, but I always had more than 3 tests, I thought. So before Jesus began his ministry, he was confronted with the same temptations as you and I. And so we need to kind of look at this as a way of which these are our temptations as well. So before we begin our time of sermon, we're going to sing together a hymn. I think part of our greatest temptation of life always is about how we're going to live our lives. And we are always confronted with the same temptations, I think, that Jesus was confronted with. You know, do I let my self-gratification control the path that I set for my life, or am I going to allow God to have a part of that and live the life that God has designed for me, to allow God to determine my direction for my way of life? And there was 3 temptations that are listed here. So again, I want you to visualize these as being your temptations. The first one he talks about is a temptation to turn stone into bread. And this is the temptation that we have to try to be relevant, right? We want to be relevant. How I wish I could turn stones into bread that would help feed people who are hungry in their times of need, right? And I can't tell you how many times how frustrated it is to walk the streets in Ecuador, in Persir, and to watch these kids and adults drink from stale water from a ditch that has animal and waste, human waste, and also pesticides in there. And I wish that I could just go to them and put my hand in the water and it'd be fresh water for them to drink. I would love to do that, or even how frustrated it is when people come here every single day of the week to try to get money in order to pay their bills or to get food. And what they really need is some help to understand how to manage their life better. And I wish I could just put my hand on their back and offer up something that would all of a sudden transform them into being a person that could manage their life a little bit better. That's a great frustration and a great tendency to just want to be able to just change things automatically for people. I mean, after all, isn't that why we're here? Aren't we here as a people of God to try to fix people's problems, to do ministry, to make them well? You know, here in this temptation, when Jesus was asked to prove his power as the Son of God, he resisted that temptation by saying, you know, there's a whole lot more to life than just eating, than just fulfilling hungers. There's more to life than that. There's so much more to life than that, because real life flows from God. And that's the greatest need. We live in a world of loneliness, of despair, and there is a greater need than bread, than clean water, than manageable lifestyles. There is a greater need for men and women to know the very heart of God. A heart that forgives, a heart that cares, a heart that reaches out and wants to heal, And in that heart, there is no suspicion. In that heart, there is no vindictiveness. There is no resentment. There's not even a tinge of hatred. To be relevant in our world is to fix people's problems quickly. To be relevant in God's kingdom is to heal the soul and to show perfect love. Jesus' second temptation was the temptation for Jesus to be powerful. You know, one of the greatest ironies throughout history, even biblical history, is when people or leadership of God begin to fall into this temptation of power. Political power, economic power, military power, it doesn't matter. They fall into this temptation as leaders to be powerful, even though they continue to speak in the name of the poor and powerless Jesus, who did not cling to his divine power, but he emptied himself out to be one of us. That just makes absolutely no sense. But it does make sense is why power is so appealing. What makes power so tempting is that it really does offer an easy substitution to a very hard task of love. Think about that. It is a whole lot easier to be God, isn't it, than to love God. It's a whole lot easier to control people than to love people. It is far easier to own life than to love life. Jesus asks us, do you love me? And we ask, can we sit on your left and on your right in your kingdom? We like those positions of power. The third temptation of Jesus has to do with doing something spectacular. Something that will bring attention to ourselves, that will separate us from others, ourselves from the competition. What will get us noticed? Throw yourself down, Jesus, and let those angels catch you and then carry you in their arms. People are going to see this amazing feat, and you know what? They're going to want to follow you. What a great, impressive way to get people to follow Jesus so that he can lead them to God. Wouldn't that be great? I mean, we see this so many times in our society. These TV evangelists, I think, are just notorious for making such an impressive display in front of people in order to win people for Jesus. So we think, well, that's okay as long as it's winning people for Jesus. But it's not okay. They bring millions of dollars showing how spectacular they are. They tend to get caught up in themselves and in their fame that they take all these people with them. It's not Jesus that's being demonstrated, but themselves trying to prove others that they are worthy of their attention. It's not a tactic that Jesus chose to use. Jesus did not come to prove himself. He only came for one reason and one reason only, and that's to love, and to allow his love to show God to others. Oh, and by the way, that's the only mission of the church, too. And it is not possible to fulfill that mission if we just keep getting in the way of God. And to remove ourselves as the center of attention is what we refer to as self-denial. Loving people without the need to prove ourselves is a very hard way to love. And to reach this level of maturity, we must drink from the cup of self-denial. A cup that does not inflate ourselves, but loves others the way that God loved others, because this is what God commands us to do. And it's Jesus who asked, are you able to drink from this cup? I end on that note.